Okay, very quickly, this is a map showing security risks in the Middle East as of the beginning of 2010. It's provided by our strategic alliance company, Control Risks. They do this to look at security risks to assets and personnel in the region and how they've changed. Now, as per Dessa's slides earlier, the darker the red, essentially the higher the risks. These kind of grayish colored countries here were considered low risk. So we can imagine a day when Syria and Libya were very low risk places to visit. So this was in the beginning of 2010. I just want to show you how this evolved a little bit over time over the past few years and how it's changed. So if we look into 2011, near the beginning of 2011, with the uprisings we all remember from that year, we can see Libya and Egypt have quickly turned darker. By a couple of years later, Syria had become pretty much a no-go zone, an extreme risk country. We can see creeping influence into Yemen. That was becoming a much more dangerous place to operate. And by the beginning of 2015, we can see the Saudi border start to creep in and become more dangerous. We can see the North Sinai province of Egypt start to take on additional security risks compared to what it used to have, given the insurgency that's come up there. And this is a screenshot of much more recently what the map looks like. And we can see further changes still, where this border area near Yemen has become redder. Yemen itself has become a no-go zone since spring this year. The western desert of Egypt has become a much more dangerous place to do business and so on. So I just want to show you this as sort of some context in the background of the region that we're in and how security risks have been evolving on a negative trajectory over the past 5 years. Now, I don't think I'm going to have time to go through this, but often what we talk about in these presentations is some of the key themes in the Middle East that are driving the deterioration in security, what's underpinning it. So one of them is the spillover effects of the countries that have degenerated into acute civil conflict. These are mainly Yemen, Libya, and the Syria-Iraq sphere. From each of those, they have been spilling over into neighboring countries, into countries that are comparatively secure, but are being impacted, especially in their border regions. This is one that I wasn't going to talk about, because it's essentially a symptom rather than a root cause. And I want to look at the root causes. One of the root causes is this tension in the region, or the effectively what's a Cold War in the region between two of the major heavyweights, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that tension between them is partly what's driving a lot of the security concerns around this region. And lastly, the rise of non-state actors. We've seen an almost unprecedented rise and an almost unprecedented presence now in the region of armed groups that challenge various governments' monopoly on the use of force. And this is one of the major things that's been happening in the region that's driving security concerns across the Middle East. So very quickly, I can try to get into this, but I literally have about 3 minutes left. Saudi Arabia and Iran have a long-standing hostility towards each other. They represent rival pillars of influence in the region. Iran representing, mainly it's based on sect. Historically, it wasn't. More recently, in the past decade or so, it's much more about sect. By that I mean Shia Islam, which is the official state religion of Iran, which is what they prescribe to, and they are essentially the pillar of influence for the Shia community around the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia, which is the same pillar for Sunni Islam. Okay, so now in the Middle East and in the world of geopolitics, much like in life, having friends is something that's very important. And I want to look at sort of who are the friends, where that influence is projected around the region, and then I will get into how that affects these different countries. For Saudi Arabia, its sphere mainly includes Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. These are the other Sunni majority states that are allied with Saudi Arabia. They're not always perfect alliances, but these are definitely close partnerships that have important implications. For Iran, the partnerships are mainly across basically looking west. Now in Iraq, the government itself, being now a Shia-led government since about 2005, has been a close ally of Iran. In Syria, obviously not all of Syria is allied to Iran, but the government itself is the rump regime of Bashar al-Assad, is very closely tied with the Iranian regime and very closely supported by them militarily as well. In Lebanon, this is mainly a reference to the Shia movement Hezbollah, which is a powerful militia, which is also very active in Syria. But it's important to note that mostly within these countries where Iran has influence, it's not the entire country. It's not the entire system. It's often a part of that system. Unlike with Saudi Arabia, where generally the states have wide control over the domestic security environment, and therefore that partnership's a bit stronger. This is partly to do with the numbers in total across the Middle East of Sunnis about 90%, Shia is about 10%. This makes it in a minority position, it's a lot more difficult to find those partners. Sect has become the most reliable way to find allies that can be long-standing allies. Okay? Yemen, of course, is a place very topically these days with the war that's happening there. The very tragic conflict that's broken out since March, earlier really, since the rebellion began, is really a disputed area. Now, from the outside, this looks very much like a proxy war, and that's what we mean by a Cold War between these two powers, is that though that broader regional war is not fought directly between those powers, but proxies of each and allies of each fight against each other in various theaters around the region. These are mainly Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. Now, Lebanon obviously is not a war zone at the moment. It's comparatively stable. Historically, that was not always the case. Lebanon has long been a venue of serious competition between Saudi and Iran, and most of the political decisions that play out there are the result of competition between those foreign powers, that foreign influence. Syria is a much more direct proxy war between these countries. Yemen is a bit less so, mainly because domestically they may have support from abroad from those powers, but the people in Yemen don't think of it that way necessarily. They take support where they can get it, but domestically they don't think of it as Shia Sunni. They don't think of it as I'm doing this for Iran or Saudi, anything like that. It's much more about the very domestic considerations.